Eleanor sat at the small wooden table, her hands trembling as she unfolded the letter. The bold words on the page seemed to blur before her eyes. Notice of eviction. It was official now. She had 30 days to leave the house she once called home. A hollow silence filled the room, broken only by the distant hum of traffic outside. Her chest tightened as she thought of everything that had led to this moment. The divorce, the financial collapse, the endless nights of doubt. It felt as if life had stripped her of every comfort she once relied upon. She whispered to herself, how did it all come to this? The walls around her seemed to echo back the question. The letter slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the floor. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling as tears welled in her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt completely powerless. No plan, no hope, no clear direction to follow. Just the sharp edge of uncertainty pressing against her. But as she sat there, an ember of defiance flickered in her chest. Something inside resisted the thought of giving up. She had faced storms before, though none as devastating as this. Could she find the strength to rise again? Or was this truly the end of her story? The phone buzzed on the table, startling her. A reminder of unpaid bills appeared on the screen. She turned it face down, unwilling to confront more bad news. Her breathing grew heavy as she pressed her palms to her face. Everything seemed to close in, threatening to crush her spirit. She stood and walked toward the window, gazing out at the fading sunlight. Portland's skyline glowed in warm hues of orange and pink, a city alive with possibility, yet she felt disconnected from it all. Somewhere out there, life moved forward while she remained stuck in place. In that fragile moment, Eleanor whispered a silent vow. She didn't know how or when, but she would find a way to survive this. A seed of resilience was buried deep inside her. She had no idea that this broken beginning would soon lead to a transformation beyond her imagination. Eleanor's mind drifted back to the courtroom, the day the judge finalized her divorce. The words had echoed like a gavel, striking her heart. Years of marriage dissolved into legal terms and signatures. She walked out with nothing but her last name and a sense of emptiness. The woman who once believed in forever was left facing an uncertain tomorrow. The collapse of her small design business followed soon after. Bills piled higher than the orders that came in. Every attempt to keep the doors open only delayed the inevitable. Bankruptcy was not just a financial failure, it was a wound to her identity. She felt stripped of dignity, left standing in the ruins of what she had built. Nights were the hardest. Alone in her modest rental, she replayed every choice, every mistake. She asked herself whether she had been blind or simply unlucky. The sound of silence pressed in like a weight. Even the hum of the refrigerator felt louder than her thoughts. Regret was a heavy companion, always present. Her friends had once cheered her spirits, but most drifted away during the hardest times. Invitations dwindled, phone calls faded. She could not blame them. Struggles often isolate, and hers felt too heavy to share. The loneliness grew roots, and her world became smaller with each passing month. Yet, within those quiet moments, she noticed something unexpected. A memory of flour-dusted hands, the warmth of an oven, and the laughter of her mother teaching her to bake. It was not business, not survival, just pure joy. The thought stirred something faint but familiar inside her. She had brushed it aside for years, dismissing it as hobby, not purpose. But now, in her lowest valley, the memory returned like a whisper of possibility. Could something so simple hold a key to her future? Or was it just nostalgia trying to soothe her pain? Eleanor shook her head, unwilling to believe in fleeting dreams. She gathered the eviction notice from the floor and placed it on the table. Tomorrow, she told herself, she would begin looking for practical solutions. But deep in her heart, a quiet seed of inspiration had already been planted. Morning light streamed through the thin curtains, and Eleanor sat with a cup of lukewarm coffee. The bitterness mirrored her mood. She scanned job listings on her old laptop, but every opportunity seemed impossible. Too young to retire, too old to be chosen. In a competitive market, she felt invisible. The silence of rejection weighed heavy before she even applied. Her bank account balance blinked back at her with cruel honesty. What little remained would not cover the rent, much less a new home. The thought of moving into a shelter pressed against her chest like a stone. Pride battled with reality, and both left her exhausted. She sighed, closing the screen with trembling fingers. Walking through the neighborhood, she noticed families laughing, businesses thriving. Portland's streets bustled with life, but she moved like a ghost among them. Every storefront reminded her of what she had lost. Every cafe window reflected not possibility, but her sense of failure. She lowered her gaze, afraid to confront her own reflection. Later, she stood in her kitchen, staring at the bare shelves. A few ingredients remained: flour, sugar, and eggs. The sight brought back that memory again, of her mother's kitchen, where the smell of fresh bread once filled the air. It was both comfort and torment. She shook her head, unwilling to indulge in something that felt so far away. But desperation leaves little room for pride. She took the flour in her hands, feeling its softness between her fingers. The act slowed her racing thoughts. She cracked eggs into a bowl, stirred slowly, and for a brief moment, time seemed to pause. The kitchen grew warm as the oven clicked to life. As the bread baked, the aroma filled the small space. Eleanor closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, and tears rolled down her cheeks. It was a reminder of simpler times, of joy that once came naturally. For the first time in weeks, her heart eased, even if only for a fleeting moment. When she pulled the loaf from the oven, she held it like something precious. She tasted a small piece, still warm, and felt a spark of hope. It was not a solution, not yet, but it was something, and that something lingered in her mind long after the bread was gone. The next morning, Eleanor woke with an unusual energy. She decided to bake again, not for survival but for solace. The act of mixing, kneading, and waiting felt therapeutic. Each step grounded her, reminding her that life could still hold small rituals of comfort. The smell of bread became her morning prayer. Neighbors began to notice. As she opened her window, the aroma drifted through the hallways of her building. Mrs. Carter, from across the hall, knocked one afternoon. Curious about the scent, Eleanor hesitated, then offered her a slice. The woman's delighted smile lit up the dim hallway. "This is amazing," she said warmly. It was the first genuine compliment Eleanor had received in months. Something about the gratitude in Mrs. Carter's eyes stirred her heart. The bread was simple, yet it carried a weight beyond flavor. It carried connection, a connection she had missed desperately during her long months of isolation. That night, Eleanor searched online for baking trends. Articles highlighted a rising demand for gluten-free products across the country. Curious, she read story after story of small bakers who found success by offering healthier alternatives. The words gluten-free bakery lingered in her thoughts like a distant possibility. Her rational mind resisted. She had no business plan, no savings, no experience in entrepreneurship anymore. But her heart whispered, maybe this was the seed waiting to grow. Could her oven, her hands, and her resilience carve a new path forward? The idea both terrified and excited her. She scribbled notes in a worn notebook, recipes, flavor ideas, even possible names for a bakery. For the first time in years, her pen moved quickly, as if guided by unseen energy. The pages filled with hope disguised as plans. She closed the notebook carefully, as if protecting a fragile dream, before falling asleep. Eleanor held the notebook against her chest. Maybe this is my chance, she whispered into the dark. It was not yet a plan, but it was more than she had yesterday. And that, she realized, was enough to carry her into tomorrow. Days turned into weeks as Eleanor experimented with gluten-free recipes. The first attempts were far from perfect. Breads crumbled, cakes fell flat, and frustration tightened her jaw. She wondered if this path was foolish, just another failure waiting to happen. Yet something in her refused to quit. She remembered her mother's voice. Patience makes the bread rise. With every batch, Eleanor adjusted, learned, and improved. Slowly, textures became softer, flavors richer. Each mistake was a teacher, guiding her closer to success. Her kitchen became a small laboratory of resilience and hope. But resources were scarce. Buying ingredients stretched her already fragile budget. She sold a few belongings, old clothes, unused furniture to keep experimenting. It was a painful sacrifice, but it reminded her that she was investing in something that mattered. Courage became her new currency. One evening, she invited a few neighbors to taste her creations. Nervous, she watched as they sampled her gluten-free bread. The smiles that spread across their faces were priceless. Words like delicious and surprisingly good filled the room. Eleanor's heart swelled with pride, she thought. She had lost forever. The compliments did more than validate her effort. They sparked possibility. What if this was more than a hobby? What if she could turn these loaves into her lifeline? The question lingered in the air, heavy with both promise and risk. She dared not answer it too quickly. Instead, she wrote in her notebook again, "Believe in small beginnings." It became her mantra, her quiet reminder that progress often starts with fragile steps. For the first time in years, she saw not just problems, but potential. She allowed herself to dream, if only a little dot, as she cleaned the kitchen that night. Eleanor glanced at the empty counter. Tomorrow, she decided, she would try something bold. She didn't know how it would unfold, but she was ready to face it. A spark of courage lit her heart, pointing her toward the unknown ahead. Saturday morning arrived with a chill in the Portland air. Eleanor carried a basket of freshly baked gluten-free loaves to the local community market. Her heart raced with every step, fear whispering that no one would stop by her small table. She arranged the bread carefully, smoothing the cloth beneath it as if perfection might bring courage. Shoppers bustled past, their bags filled with flowers, vegetables, and handmade crafts. For long minutes, no one came near her booth. Doubt pressed heavy on her shoulders, and she considered packing up early. Just as she reached for her basket, a young woman paused. Drawn by the warm scent of bread, the woman asked shyly, "Is this gluten-free?" Eleanor nodded, her voice shaking, as she explained. The customer bought a loaf, then another for her friend. Eleanor's hands trembled as she accepted the cash. It was only a few dollars, but it felt like the start of something greater. That word spread slowly. A couple stopped to sample a slice, then purchased a loaf. Another family asked if she would return next week. Each small exchange built momentum, replacing fear with fragile hope. For the first time, she felt seen not as a failure, but as a baker with something valuable to share. As the day went on, Eleanor began to smile genuinely. Conversations flowed, laughter returned to her lips. She realized the bread was not only feeding stomachs, it was creating connection. The warmth of community began to seep into her lonely heart. By the end of the market, her basket was nearly empty. She packed up, exhausted but glowing with pride. The few bills in her pocket meant survival, but the joy in her chest meant possibility. She walked home lighter than she had in months. That night, she wrote in her notebook, "First market, first customers, first step." It wasn't just bread anymore, it was hope rising in her own hands. The following week, Eleanor returned to the market with more loaves. This time, a few familiar faces came looking for her booth. The young woman from before smiled and said, "Your bread made my week." Hearing those words, Eleanor's heart swelled. It was proof that her work mattered. She experimented with new recipes, muffins, cookies, even cakes. Each creation was a test of patience and courage. Some turned out well, others collapsed in the oven. Still, every batch carried lessons. Slowly, she was building not only skill, but also confidence. Customers began to share her name with others. A mother thanked her for giving her gluten-intolerant son the joy of eating bread again. Eleanor listened with tears in her eyes. It was more than business, it was purpose, filling a void she hadn't known how to mend. Yet, challenges remained. She often worked late into the night, her kitchen a whirlwind of flour and mixing bowls. Fatigue pressed hard, and doubts crept in. Was she strong enough to turn this fragile spark into a flame? The weight of survival still loomed heavy, but each morning, when she pulled a loaf from the oven, she found renewed strength. The smell of bread became her reminder that progress, no matter how small, was still progress. Hope was no longer distant, it lived in every bite, every smile from her customers. Neighbors stopped by to ask when she would open a shop of her own. The thought terrified her, but it also thrilled her. Could she truly build something permanent from these humble beginnings? The idea whispered louder with every passing day. As she closed her notebook that evening, Eleanor wrote, "Hope is rising, I must keep going." It was not yet certainty, but it was enough to light her way forward. The third market was less successful. Rain poured down, keeping many shoppers away. Eleanor stood under a flimsy tent, her loaves stacked neatly but untouched. Hours passed with only a few sales, and disappointment pressed against her chest. The optimism of the previous weeks began to fade. Back home, she counted her earnings and felt tears sting her eyes. It wasn't enough to cover even the ingredients she had bought. The fragile thread of progress seemed ready to snap. "Maybe I was foolish to believe," she whispered to the empty kitchen. Exhaustion grew heavier as she struggled to balance baking with her search for other income. Each rejection from job applications stung more sharply. The fear of losing everything once again returned, circling her thoughts like shadows. She fought to keep it from consuming her, but resilience, though fragile, still lived in her. She remembered the smiles of customers who had thanked her. She clung to their words like lifelines. "This matters," she reminded herself. "It matters to them, and it matters to me." Determined, she spent the night perfecting recipes that had failed. Every mistake became a stepping stone rather than a wall. Though weary, she felt her courage grow stronger with each trial. The setbacks became fuel instead of defeat. The next morning, she baked with renewed purpose. Her hands moved with steadiness, her heart with quiet fire. She packed loaves not just with flour and yeast, but with persistence and hope. The struggle had not defeated her, it had forged her, and in that truth, Eleanor found strength. She realized the path forward would never be smooth, but every bump would only deepen her resilience. Tomorrow, she vowed, she would try again. The following week, Eleanor returned to the market. This time, the sun broke through the Portland clouds, and the crowd was lively. She set up her booth nervously, hoping the rain had not driven people away for good. To her surprise, familiar faces returned, smiling warmly as they greeted her. Mrs. Carter, her neighbor, appeared with a group of friends. "We came just for you," she said with pride. They each bought loaves and cookies, praising her baking. Eleanor's cheeks flushed with gratitude, touched by their loyalty. Their support reminded her she was not as alone as she had believed. Soon, word of mouth spread faster. A local blogger stopped by, curious about her gluten-free products. He tasted a slice, snapped photos, and promised to feature her in his column. Eleanor could hardly believe it. Her small booth might reach more people than she ever imagined. That evening, she received a message from a stranger who had read the blog post. They wanted to place an order for a family gathering. Eleanor's heart raced with excitement. The idea that her bread could travel beyond the market filled her with pride and possibility. For the first time, she felt momentum building, not just sales, but a sense of belonging, a ripple of community lifting her higher. Each kind word and helping hand built a bridge across her loneliness. She realized people weren't just buying bread. They were investing in her courage. Her notebook filled with ideas, delivery options, catering, maybe even a storefront one day. The dreams no longer felt impossible. They felt like seeds waiting for her to nurture them into bloom. Before sleeping, Eleanor whispered, "I am not invisible anymore." It was more than hope. It was the beginning of transformation. Weeks turned into months, and Eleanor's presence at the market became steady. Customers sought her booth eagerly, some arriving early to secure a loaf before she sold out. The consistency gave her courage to imagine something bigger. The whispers of a bakery became a plan, fragile but alive. She researched small business loans, rental spaces, and licenses. Each detail felt overwhelming, like standing at the base of a mountain. Doubts threatened to pull her back, but she pressed on, fueled by the faces of those who relied on her bread. This was not just about money, it was about meaning. Late at night, she sketched layouts of a cozy shop. She envisioned warm light spilling across wooden tables, the smell of bread filling the air, and customers gathering to share laughter. The picture in her mind carried her through sleepless hours. It was a dream worth chasing. Still, obstacles loomed. Financial risks, endless paperwork, and the fear of failing again pressed hard against her resolve. Yet she reminded herself of how far she had come from eviction notice to hope rising in her oven. That truth gave her strength. One evening, she shared her vision with a small group of neighbors. To her surprise, they cheered her on, offering advice and encouragement. One even offered to help with painting if she found a space. Their belief in her lit a flame brighter than her doubts. The idea of a bakery was no longer just Eleanor's dream, became a community's dream. To every supportive word turned the impossible into the possible. Her courage was no longer just survival, it was the foundation of transformation. As she closed her notebook that night, she wrote, "This bakery is not just bread, it is purpose, hope, and new beginnings." Eleanor sat quietly one evening, reflecting on the journey behind her. From the despair of the eviction notice to the joy of seeing customers smile, she had traveled a road she never imagined. More than bread, she had baked resilience into her days. For the first time in years, she recognized herself again. She realized the woman staring back in the mirror was no longer broken. Wrinkles etched stories of endurance, not defeat. Her eyes held light, not shadows. Eleanor had become someone stronger, someone capable of shaping her own destiny. The rediscovery felt like a gift she had long forgotten. Her notebook revealed the evidence of growth: scribbled recipes, bold ideas, and phrases of encouragement written in shaky handwriting. Each page was a map of transformation. Every loaf sold, every smile received, had brought her closer to the woman she was meant to be. As she baked late into the night, She hummed a tune her mother once sang. The rhythm filled the kitchen, blending with the scent of rising bread. In that moment, she felt connected to her roots, her past, and her future all at once. It was more than baking, it was healing. Eleanor thought about the people she had touched with her work, families enjoying bread together, children savoring treats without fear of allergies. Her labor was not just survival, it was service. She had found a calling in the very place she once felt only loss. For years, she had searched for meaning outside herself. Now she realized it had always been within her hands, waiting to rise like dough in the oven. Her courage had awakened something greater. Purpose. It filled her with warmth deeper than any loaf could provide. As she closed her eyes that night, Eleanor whispered a prayer of gratitude, not for wealth or success, but for resilience, for new beginnings, and for the rediscovery of herself. The day finally arrived when Eleanor opened the doors to her small bakery. The space was modest, with wooden shelves and sunlight streaming through the front windows. The scent of fresh bread and muffins drifted into the street, inviting passersby to step inside. Her hands shook as she placed the open sign on the door. The first customers entered hesitantly, curious about the new shop on the block. Eleanor greeted them with nervous smiles, offering samples of her gluten-free bread. The laughter and compliments that followed lifted the weight from her shoulders. The bakery had come alive with warmth and possibility. Soon, more customers trickled in, families filled the tables, neighbors gathered to chat, and children pressed their noses against the glass display. Eleanor moved gracefully between them, her apron dusted with flour, her heart glowing with pride. This was more than business, it was a community space. Mrs. Carter walked in carrying flowers, placing them on the counter as a gift. "You've built something beautiful," she said softly. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes as she hugged her neighbor. The shop was no longer just hers, it belonged to everyone who believed in her. As the day went on, the cash register chimed with steady rhythm. But it wasn't the money that filled her heart, it was the laughter, the conversations, the sense of belonging that had returned to her life. She had created a place where hope could be shared. By closing time, she sat at one of the tables, exhausted but overflowing with gratitude. The walls glowed with life, the shelves half empty, and her heart completely full. It was a dream realized, born from ashes, and built with courage. Eleanor locked the door that night with trembling hands. She looked back once, whispering, "Thank you," to the space that symbolized her rebirth. The bakery had come alive, and so had she. Weeks turned into months, and the bakery thrived. Word spread quickly through Portland, and soon customers lined up outside the door. Reviews praised her recipes as both delicious and comforting. Local newspapers featured her story, calling her a symbol of resilience and hope. The recognition was humbling. Eleanor never sought fame, only survival. Yet, seeing her journey inspire others filled her with quiet pride. Messages arrived from people across the city, thanking her for proving that new beginnings were possible at any age. Her story became more than her own. She hired help to keep up with demand. Young bakers eager to learn stood by her side, filling the kitchen with fresh energy. Teaching them brought her joy, as if passing on not just skills, but the courage to chase their own dreams. The bakery had become a beacon of transformation. Still, growth brought challenges. Balancing orders, managing staff, and maintaining quality demanded more from her than ever before. At times, she felt overwhelmed, afraid of losing control again. But unlike before, she was no longer alone. Her team and community stood beside her. She reminded herself daily, resilience is built step by step. Each obstacle was not a wall but a ladder, guiding her higher. The struggles no longer defined her, they refined her. Every new challenge became proof of her strength. Eleanor realized success was not measured by profit alone, but by the lives touched through her work. Each loaf carried a message of hope. Each customer left with more than bread, they carried a piece of her courage. As she stood in her bustling bakery one evening, she smiled at the sight of people gathered in joy. Her dream had grown beyond her hands, reaching hearts she had never met, and that, she knew, was the true reward. One quiet morning before opening, Eleanor sat with a cup of tea in her bakery. She thought back to the chaos she once lived in, the eviction, the loneliness, the endless nights of despair. It felt like a lifetime ago, though only months had passed. Her heart ached with gratitude for the distance she had traveled. The transformation was not just about the bakery, it was about rediscovering purpose in the ruins of failure. Eleanor understood now that pain had carved space for growth. Without the collapse, she might never have found the strength to rise in this new way. She realized her story was no longer about loss, but about courage. Each obstacle had been a stepping stone to something greater. Every scar, every tear had been part of the foundation. Her bakery was not just a business, it was a monument to resilience. As customers began to arrive, she greeted them with a smile that came easily now. Her laughter rang through the shop. Her eyes sparkled with hope. She had become someone who no longer feared the unknown, but embraced it with open arms. Her community recognized her strength, but Eleanor knew the truth. It wasn't strength alone. It was also the willingness to be vulnerable, to start small, and to believe in new beginnings even when everything seemed lost. That was the heart of her transformation. She looked around at the shop filled with warmth and connection. What once was chaos had become purpose. What once was despair had become hope. The journey had changed her in ways she could never have planned. Eleanor whispered to herself, "I am exactly where I am meant to be." The words wrapped around her like a blanket, comforting and sure. The morning sun rose over Portland, painting the sky with soft shades of gold and pink. Eleanor stood outside her bakery, unlocking the door for another day. She paused to breathe in the crisp air, her heart steady and full. Every sunrise now felt like a gift, a reminder of her journey. Inside, the bakery buzzed with familiar life. The ovens warmed, the aroma of bread filled the air, and laughter echoed from her small team. Eleanor moved with grace, no longer burdened by fear but lifted by purpose. She had found a rhythm that felt like peace. Customers arrived, greeting her with smiles and kind words. Some spoke of how her bread had changed their lives. Others shared stories of their own resilience. Eleanor listened with care, realizing her bakery had become a space where hope was both given and received. She thought of the woman she had been, the one who held the eviction notice with trembling hands. That woman had believed she was finished, but the truth was, she had only just begun. The ashes of her old life had given way to something far more beautiful. Eleanor's journey was no longer about survival, it was about transformation. She had turned brokenness into purpose, despair into courage, endings into beginnings. Her life stood as living proof that it is never too late to rise again. As the day unfolded, she stood by the window, watching sunlight spill across her bakery floor. She smiled, her heart brimming with gratitude. The new dawn was not just outside, it lived within her. Eleanor whispered softly, "Hope always rises." And with that, she stepped forward into the life she had built with her own hands.